The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The woman drove calmly down the road, her hands steady on the wheel. She had just left her friend's house, her heart light after a warm afternoon of tea and conversation. The road was quiet, the traffic light. The only sound was the gentle hum of the car engine and the faint music playing on the radio. She smiled, feeling peaceful, unaware that her evening was about to change in a way she would never forget in her rearview mirror. She suddenly noticed flashing red and blue lights. At first, she thought they were meant for someone else. She checked her speed. She wasn't driving fast. She had stopped at every light, followed every rule. But the lights stayed behind her, flashing insistently, demanding her attention. Her smile faded. "Why me?" she whispered to herself, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. Slowly, she pulled the car to the side of the road, her heart beating faster than before. She had never been in trouble with the police. She was careful, always respectful of rules. And yet, here she was, being pulled over for reasons she couldn't understand. The sound of the patrol car stopping behind her made her chest tighten. She could see the reflection of the lights bouncing off her mirror, filling the car with red and blue. It felt like the whole world was watching, even though the street was nearly empty. She rolled down her window, trying to breathe steadily. Two police officers stepped out of the car. Their uniforms looked sharp under the fading sunlight, their faces stern and unreadable. The woman felt her palms grow sweaty. She had nothing to hide, but still, something about the way they walked toward her made her uneasy. One officer approached her side, leaning slightly as he peered into her car. The other stood a little back, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the surroundings. It didn't feel like a routine stop, it felt like a scene from a movie. Except she was the one trapped in the middle of it. "License and registration," the first officer said firmly, his tone leaving no space for questions. The woman nodded quickly, fumbling with her purse. "Yes, of course, officer," she replied, her voice polite but shaky. She pulled out her wallet, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed over her license. She opened her glove compartment for the registration, the papers slipping for a moment before she caught them. She forced a small smile, trying to show she meant no harm as she handed them over. She finally gathered the courage to ask, "Excuse me, officer? May I know why I was stopped?" The man didn't answer right away. He glanced at her license, then at her face, then back at the license again. The silence made her chest tighten. Finally, he said vaguely, "Routine check." Her stomach twisted. Something about the way he said it didn't feel right. She wasn't speeding. Her car was in perfect condition. Her seatbelt was on. This wasn't routine. She could sense it. The second officer stepped closer now, his eyes narrowing as if trying to find something wrong. He leaned slightly toward her window. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. She blinked, surprised by the question. "From a friend's house," she answered softly. "Where are you going?" "He pressed home," she said, her voice steady but quiet. The two men exchanged a quick glance, something unspoken passing between them. The woman noticed it, and her unease deepened. Why were they questioning her like this? Why did they look at her as if she was guilty of something when she hadn't done anything wrong? Other cars drove by slowly, their drivers glancing curiously at the scene. The woman's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wasn't a criminal. She hadn't broken the law. And yet, here she was, sitting on the side of the road. Lights flashing behind her. People staring as though she was someone to be ashamed of. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, fighting the urge to cry. She reminded herself to stay calm, to stay respectful. She had always believed that if you were polite, if you followed the rules, you would be treated fairly. But as the minutes passed, doubt began to creep into her heart. The officer holding her license looked back at her and asked again, his tone sharper this time. Are you sure you weren't driving erratically? Swerving? Distracted? Her eyes widened. No, officer. I promise I was driving carefully. I would never. He cut her off. We'll see about that. Her heart sank. She felt trapped, cornered by suspicion she didn't deserve. Her hands shook on the wheel. She wanted to call someone, to have a witness. But she was too afraid to move suddenly. The air in the car grew heavy, every second stretching into what felt like hours. She swallowed hard, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, at the mercy of two officers who didn't seem interested in the end. Truth.es. As the first officer walked back toward his car with her license, the woman's eyes darted to her phone, resting on the passenger seat. She thought of her husband. She thought of how he always told her to stay calm in stressful moments. And in that moment, for the first time, she considered sending him a message. Little did she know, that single thought would change everything. Asterisk. The woman sat stiff in her seat, her hands resting tightly on the steering wheel. Her car was silent now, except for the low hum of the engine. The flashing red and blue lights behind her reflected across the glass, painting the inside of her car in harsh, restless colors. She tried to steady her breathing, but her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The first officer returned slowly, holding her license in his hand. He didn't look satisfied. He leaned down again to her open window, his face just inches away, and his tone sharp. Tell me again, where exactly are you coming from? He asked. The woman blinked, surprised. She had already answered this. From a friend's house, officer, she replied gently, forcing her voice to stay calm. What friend? What's the address? He pressed, narrowing his eyes. She hesitated, caught off guard by the strange intensity of his questions. It's just a friend I've known for years. We had tea and talked for a while. I don't know if I remember her exact address right now. The officer's lips tightened, as if her answer wasn't good enough. He leaned back slightly, crossed his arms, and studied her carefully. His partner, who had been standing silently by, stepped closer now. His boots crunched against the gravel, his expression hard. Do you know why we stopped you? The second officer asked. The woman shook her head quickly. No, officer. I don't understand. I wasn't speeding. I stopped at every light. Was there a problem with my car? The first officer gave a short laugh, but it wasn't a friendly one. You sure seem nervous for someone who's done nothing wrong. Her cheeks flushed. She tried to defend herself, her words tumbling out in a rush. I am nervous because this has never happened to me before. I've never been pulled over. I don't know what I did. I promise, I haven't broken any law. The officers exchanged another quick glance, the kind that made her stomach twist. It felt like they were playing a game she didn't understand, a game with rules that changed every second. Step out of the vehicle, the second officer ordered suddenly. Her eyes widened. Step out. But why? She asked softly, her voice trembling. Routine check, the first one repeated, though his tone made it sound more like a command than an explanation. The woman swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't right, but she also knew resisting would only make things worse. Slowly, carefully, she unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the door open. Her legs felt shaky as she stepped onto the cool pavement, the late evening air chilling her skin. The officers circled her car like hunters, their eyes scanning every detail. One peered inside the back seat, shining a small flashlight even though there was nothing unusual there, just a handbag, a sweater, and a grocery bag. The other officer kept his eyes on her, his expression unreadable. Where exactly were you going? He asked again, his voice slower this time. Home, she whispered. And where's that? He demanded. She told him her neighborhood, her voice breaking slightly under the weight of the repeated questioning. The first officer chuckled again, shaking his head as if he didn't believe her. Strange. You don't seem very sure about your answers. People who act nervous usually have something to hide. Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream that she had nothing to hide, that she was just a woman driving home, that she had done nothing wrong. But instead, she pressed her lips together and stayed silent. She remembered her husband's advice. Stay calm. Don't argue. Don't give them a reason. But the silence didn't save her. One officer leaned closer, his voice low but heavy. You know, we could make this a lot harder for you. Or you can just answer our questions properly. Her hands trembled. She felt cornered, trapped between fear and dignity. She had always trusted the uniform, believed the badge meant protection. But now, standing on the side of the road under flashing lights, she wondered if the badge was just another kind of weapon. Cars passed by, slowing down as drivers looked at the scene. Their stares made her cheeks burn with shame. To strangers, she probably looked guilty, like someone caught breaking the law. But inside, she knew the truth. She had done nothing wrong. She looked at her car, then at the officers, then back down at the pavement. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding. She felt like crying, but she held it in. She couldn't show weakness, not now. The questioning went on, circling back to the same things again and again. Where had she been? Where was she going? Who did she know? Why did she look so nervous? Each question felt like a wall closing in until she could barely breathe. And then, in a moment of desperation, her eyes flicked toward the passenger seat of her car toward her phone. Her husband's face flashed in her mind. He had always told her, if you're ever in trouble, call me. Her throat tightened. Maybe it was time. Maybe this was more than she could handle alone. She forced herself to stay calm, answering their questions with as much patience as she could gather. But in her heart, she knew one thing for sure. She needed help. She needed someone who could stop this madness, and she knew exactly who that someone was. The woman stood beside her car, her hands shaking slightly at her sides. The cool evening breeze brushed against her face, but it wasn't enough to calm her racing heart. The two officers circled her like predators, studying their prey, their eyes sharp, their questions sharper. She felt the weight of their presence pressing down on her, making it harder to breathe. One of them leaned against her car window, glancing inside again as though expecting to find something hidden. The other stayed closer to her, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on her nervous expression. You seem awfully jumpy, he said flatly. Why is that? She swallowed hard. Because I don't understand why I was stopped. I didn't do anything wrong. I've never been pulled over before. This is frightening. The officer smirked. Frightening. Only guilty people get frightened. Her stomach twisted at his words. She wanted to argue, to shout that he was wrong, but her voice stayed trapped in her throat. Every time she tried to defend herself, their eyes grew colder, as if they were daring her to make one wrong move. The second officer stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. Do you carry anything illegal? Drugs? Weapons? Anything you're hiding? Her eyes widened in disbelief. No, of course not. I don't have anything like that. Please, you can look. I've done nothing wrong, but her attempt at honesty only seemed to amuse them. The officer gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. That's exactly what people with something to hide say. The woman's chest tightened. It was as if every answer she gave became proof against her. The harder she tried to explain herself, the less they seemed to believe her. It was a trap hand, invisible one, but she could feel herself caught inside it. Cars passed slowly on the road, some drivers turning their heads to watch. She felt her cheeks burn with shame. To strangers, she probably looked guilty, like someone being caught in the middle of a crime. But she knew the truth. She was innocent. She was just a woman trying to drive home. The officer nearest to her took a step closer, his shadow falling across her face. His voice dropped lower, carrying a warning. "We can make this easy, or we can make it very hard. It depends on how cooperative you are." Her throat went dry. "I've been cooperative," she whispered. "I gave you my license, my registration. I answered your questions. What more can I do?" He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as though testing her. "Maybe you're not telling us everything. Maybe you've got something in your story you're leaving out." The woman shook her head quickly. "No, I've told you the truth. I just want to go home." But the words felt small, powerless against their heavy stares. The pressure grew thicker, suffocating. The silence between each question stretched long, heavy, crushing. She could feel her pulse racing in her temples. It wasn't just about being pulled over anymore. It felt like being accused of something invisible, something she couldn't defend herself against. The officers began circling again, their boots echoing in the quiet street. One tapped the hood of her car with his hand, a sharp sound that made her flinch. "You know," he said slowly, "it's very suspicious when people get this nervous. Makes us think they're hiding something." She wanted to scream. "I'm nervous because you're making me nervous," she thought. But she kept her lips pressed tight. If she spoke those words, it would only make things worse. Instead, she glanced toward her passenger seat where her phone still rested. Her husband's face flashed in her mind again, stronger this time. His calm voice echoed in her memory. "If you ever feel unsafe, call me right away. Don't wait." Her fingers twitched. She wanted to reach for the phone, but fear held her back. What if they thought she was reaching for something else? What if they accused her of resisting? The wrong move could turn this bad situation into something far worse. The officers moved closer again, their voices firm, their tone heavy. "Tell us again where you're coming from," one demanded. She repeated her answer, her voice shaking now. "From my friend's house, please." "I've already told you, and where's your friend live?" She gave the street name, but the officer only raised an eyebrow. Funny, people usually know exact addresses. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I don't remember the number right now. But I swear I'm telling the truth." The second officer gave a mocking chuckle, shaking his head. "Doesn't sound very convincing." Her chest ached. She felt as though every breath was heavier than the last. The pressure was unbearable, like being trapped in a cage with no way out. And in that moment, she realized she couldn't fight this alone. Her eyes drifted again to her phone. This time, she made a decision. When the officers turned their attention back to her car, she quickly reached for it. Her hand shook as she slid it into her palm, her thumb pressing the screen. She typed a short, desperate message to her husband. "Pulled over. No reason. Please come." She pressed send. Her heart raced as the screen went dark again. She slipped the phone back down quickly before the officers could notice. She stood there, trembling, praying silently. She didn't know how long it would take him to get there. But she knew one thing. She needed him now, more than ever. And soon, very soon. The night would take a turn the officers never expected. Asterisk. The woman's heart raced as she slipped her phone back to the passenger seat. Her hands trembled so badly that she had to press them against her thighs to keep them steady. She had sent the message. Now, all she could do was wait. The two officers were still circling her car, asking the same questions over and over. "Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Why are you nervous?" Each question felt heavier, pressing down on her chest, squeezing the air out of her lungs. She answered as best she could, but she knew her words didn't matter to them. They had already decided how to see her suspicious, The flashing lights from their patrol car still reflected off the glass, painting her skin in red and blue. Every passing car slowed, curious eyes peeking out, strangers watching as though she were on display. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground. But she couldn't. She was trapped, waiting for something to change. Minutes passed like hours. Her legs shook as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The officers whispered to each other now, their voices too low for her to hear. She hated the way they looked at her, not like a human being, but like a problem to solve. Her phone buzzed softly on the seat inside the car. Her eyes darted to it, her heart leaping. Somehow, she managed to keep her face calm while sneaking a quick glance. The screen lit up with a single reply. "On my way?" Don't worry. Tears welled in her eyes. But this time, they weren't just from fear. They were from relief. She clung to that short message like a lifeline. Her husband was coming. He knew. She wasn't alone anymore. The first officer noticed her glance and frowned. "What are you looking at?" he demanded. She shook her head quickly. Nothing. Just my phone lit up." "Sorry, keep your hands where I can see them," he ordered, his voice sharp. She obeyed instantly, raising her trembling hands slightly to show they were empty. The second officer chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "So jumpy," he muttered. The woman turned her eyes away, staring at the darkening horizon instead. The sky had shifted from orange to deep blue, and the first stars were peeking out. She whispered a silent prayer under her breath, begging for her husband to arrive quickly. Every second felt longer than the last. She imagined his car speeding down the road, headlights cutting through the dusk. She pictured his face, calm but firm, the way he always carried himself with quiet authority. He had a way of making her feel safe, even in the worst moments. Tonight, she needed that more than ever. The officers continued pacing, their shadows long against the pavement. One tapped her car door lightly with his hand, the sound echoing in the quiet street. "Still don't believe you've got nothing to hide?" he said. She swallowed hard, but stayed silent. She knew arguing would only give them more power then. Finally, in the distance, she heard the faint but familiar sound of another car approaching. Her heart leaped. She turned her head just slightly, her eyes straining to see. Headlights appeared on the road, growing brighter with every second. She knew that car. She knew that sound. Her chest filled with a mix of relief and fear. Relief because her husband was here. Fear because she didn't know how the officers would react. The patrol car's lights still flashed, but now another pair of headlights pulled in behind them. The officers both turned, their bodies stiffening slightly. They weren't expecting anyone else. The woman's breath caught in her throat. The car door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His movements were calm, deliberate, confident. He closed the door behind him and started walking toward them, his gaze steady. The woman's heart pounded, not just with relief, but with pride. That was her husband, her protector, her anchor. And she knew the moment he arrived, everything would change. The officers straightened, exchanging quick looks. One of them lifted his hand. "Sir, stay back. This is a police matter," he called out. But her husband didn't stop. He kept walking, each step measured and sure, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked to his wife for just a second, softening with concern. She gave him a small, shaky nod. The officer repeated his warning, louder this time. "Sir," I said, "stay back." That's when her husband reached into his jacket, pulling out his wallet. In one smooth motion, he flipped it open and held it out. The badge inside glinted under the flashing lights, sharp and undeniable. The woman gasped softly. The officers froze. Their confident postures faltered, their eyes widening as the realization sank in. Her husband wasn't just any man. He was one of them, higher ranked, respected. Someone with authority far greater than theirs. The silence that followed was electric, heavier than anything before. The tables had just turned. The street was quiet, except for the pulsing red and blue lights that bounced off every surface. The woman stood frozen beside her car, her chest rising and falling quickly, as if each breath was a battle. Her husband's steps echoed against the pavement, steady and unhurried. Yet, carrying the weight of authority, the officers stiffened. Their earlier confidence seemed to waver, though they tried to keep their stern expressions. One officer lifted his hand again. "Sir, I told you to stay back. This is official police business." But the man didn't stop. His eyes were locked on his wife, scanning her face, reading the fear in her trembling body. When he was close enough, his gaze shifted to the officers, calm but piercing. Without raising his voice, he spoke. "Is there a reason you stopped my wife?" The first officer cleared his throat, his tone defensive. "Routine check." She looked suspicious. "We were just asking questions." The woman's husband tilted his head slightly, as though studying their words. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. The motion was smooth, deliberate. He flipped it open and held it in front of them. The badge inside caught the light, shining like a blade. The silence that followed was instant and heavy. The officers froze in place, their eyes widening. The smirks and cold confidence that had filled their faces earlier vanished in a blink. They exchanged a quick glance, their bodies stiff as though rooted to the ground. The woman watched it all, her heart pounding. For the first time that night, she saw the shift-the-moment power slipped away from them. Her husband didn't shout, didn't threaten. He didn't need to. The badge in his hand spoke louder than anything else. One of the officers took a cautious step back. His voice, once sharp and commanding, now cracked slightly. You're law enforcement." Her husband's expression didn't change. "I am, and not just law enforcement. I am your superior. Now, answer my question properly. Why did you stop my wife?" The second officer cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. His bravado melted. "As I said. Routine check, she." She looked nervous. "We just wanted to make sure everything was fine." The man's eyes narrowed, but his tone stayed calm. "She was nervous because you treated her like a criminal when she did nothing wrong. That's not policing. That's intimidation." The words hit harder than any shout could. The woman felt tears sting her eyes, not from fear this time, but from the relief of seeing truth finally spoken aloud. The officers stood frozen, their hands twitching slightly at their sides. They looked like schoolchildren caught doing something wrong, waiting for punishment. Their silence betrayed their guilt. Her husband lowered the wallet, but he didn't put it away. He kept the badge visible, reminding them of the weight it carried. His voice was steady, each word sharp with authority. "Do you understand what this looks like? Two officers pulling over an innocent woman for no reason, interrogating her, frightening her. Do you understand the damage that does to trust in this badge?" Neither officer answered. Their eyes were down now, their earlier confidence gone completely. The woman could see the shame spreading across their faces. Her husband stepped closer, standing protectively at her side. "You should be ashamed," he said firmly. "A badge is not a weapon to scare people. It's a promise to protect them." The woman's chest swelled with emotion. She had felt powerless only minutes ago, but now, with her husband at her side, she felt safe again. His calm strength filled the space around her, pushing back the fear that had gripped her so tightly. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their faces red. Finally, one muttered, We didn't mean any harm." Her husband's gaze hardened. "Intent does not erase actions. Tonight, you failed your duty. The words lingered in the air, heavy and final. The two officers could do nothing but nod. Their arrogance dissolved completely. The woman looked around and noticed the passing cars slowing again. But this time, the scene looked different. The strangers who glanced their way weren't just seeing flashing lights and a stopped car. They were witnessing something powerful, a lesson unfolding in real time. Her husband placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't alone. She leaned slightly toward him, the tension in her chest easing at last. The officers, meanwhile, stood awkwardly, caught in the shadow of their mistake. They looked smaller now, stripped of the false power they had tried to wield. The woman realized something in that moment. Respect doesn't come from a uniform. It doesn't come from flashing lights or harsh voices. It comes from integrity. And tonight, it was her husband, not the two officers, who showed what true authority looked like. The silence stretched again, but this time, it wasn't filled with fear. It was filled with truth. The officers had no defense left, no questions, no smirks. Just the weight of their own shame. And for the first time since the lights had flashed in her mirror, the woman felt in control, not because she had fought, but because dignity had finally stood beside her. The street was still, as though the world itself had paused to watch. The patrol car's lights continued flashing, bathing the scene in restless red and blue. But the two officers stood frozen, their bodies stiff, their expressions pale. The woman's husband held his badge in plain sight, and its shine was brighter than the lights behind them. Moments earlier, the officers had walked with confidence, their voices sharp, their stares heavy. They had treated her like prey. But now, under the weight of that badge, their confidence crumbled. It was as if the ground beneath their boots had been pulled away, leaving them standing on nothing but shame. The first officer opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His throat worked silently, his jaw clenched, but nothing formed. He glanced at his partner, hoping for support, but found only the same wide-eyed shock mirrored back at him. The woman, still standing beside her car, felt the shift too. She could almost hear it, the sound of arrogance breaking. She had been trembling moments ago, her knees weak with fear, but now 'twas the officers who looked fragile, like statues about to crack. Her husband didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm silence was more powerful than any anger. He lowered the badge slightly, but kept it visible, his eyes steady on the men in front of him. His presence filled the space, commanding respect without asking for it. The second officer cleared his throat, nervously. We didn't realize," he stammered. Her husband's gaze sharpened. "You didn't realize she was my wife? That's not the problem. The problem is that you treated her as if she were less than human. You misused your power. That is something no badge excuses." The officers froze again, their faces flushing with heat. They shifted uncomfortably, the weight of every passing car's headlights making them feel exposed. The people driving by could see them now, not as enforcers of the law, but as men caught in the act of abusing it. The woman's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with a strange sense of justice. She had never seen them look so small. Their earlier confidence, their cruel chuckles, their heavy questioning had all vanished in seconds. Now they looked like schoolboys who had been caught cheating, waiting for punishment they knew they deserved. The first officer tried again, his voice weak. We only wanted to check." She seemed nervous. Her husband's lips tightened. Of course she was nervous. You made her nervous. That's the power of your uniform. You can either comfort people or frighten them. Tonight, you chose the latter. The words struck deep. The officers dropped their eyes to the ground, unable to meet his stare. Their shoulders slumped, their hands fidgeting. The freeze had consumed them completely. They could no longer move with authority. They were pinned in place by truth. The woman watched quietly, her heart steady now. She felt almost invisible, as though the moment wasn't even about her anymore. It was about the meaning of that badge, about what it should stand for. Her husband embodied it. The two officers had failed it. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. The only sounds were the faint hum of engines from passing cars and the occasional chirp of a night insect. The officers looked around as though searching for a way out, but there was none. They were caught not by handcuffs or force, but by dignity and shame. Finally, her husband spoke again, his voice firm but calm. "Look at her," he said, motioning toward his wife. "She is a citizen. She deserves respect. If this is how you treat an innocent woman on a quiet evening, how many others have you treated the same way?" The officers froze harder, their faces paling further. The question hung in the air like a blade, cutting deeper than any accusation. Neither of them answered. Neither of them could. The woman's husband let the silence linger, making sure the weight of it sank in. Then he stepped closer, his tone sharp. "You wear that uniform to protect. Never forget that. Abuse it again, and you won't just freeze, you'll fall." The words were clear, undeniable. The two men nodded stiffly, their heads low, their voices stuck in their throats. They had nothing left. The woman finally breathed deeply, her fear replaced with something stronger: relief and pride. Relief that her husband had come. Pride that he had shown what true authority looked like, calm, fair, and unshakable. The officers stayed frozen, silent, their shame louder than sirens. The power they had tried to wield so harshly had dissolved into nothing. And in that frozen moment, the woman knew the lesson was complete. The flashing lights still painted the road, but their power seemed weaker now. The two officers, once bold and harsh, stood stiff and silent. Their shoulders slumped, their eyes lowered, as though the night itself had turned against them. The woman's husband still held his badge in his hand, its shine reminding them of what authority truly meant. The woman stood close to him, her body finally relaxing after what felt like hours of fear. She looked at the men who had terrified her minutes earlier. Now, they looked nothing like the figures of power she had first seen step out of the patrol car. They looked human, flawed, embarrassed, and small tear. Her husband slipped his badge back into his jacket, but the weight of it still hung in the air. He didn't need to hold it anymore. His words had already stripped away their arrogance. "Do you see what happened here tonight?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy. The officers shifted uneasily. Saying nothing, "You stopped a woman with no cause," he continued. "You frightened her, embarrassed her, pressed her with questions you had no right to ask. You thought the uniform gave you power. But a uniform without respect is just cloth." The silence that followed was thick. The officers couldn't meet his eyes. The truth pressed down on them like a storm. And there was no escape. The woman looked at her husband, her chest swelling with pride. She had seen him speak firmly before, but tonight his words carried something different, something deeper. He wasn't just defending her. He was defending what the badge should stand for. Finally, one of the officers muttered, "We're sorry." The words were quiet, nearly swallowed by the sound of a passing car, but they hung in the air nonetheless. The other officer nodded, his face flushed with shame. Her husband gave a single nod, not out of satisfaction, but out of acknowledgement. "Remember this moment," he said firmly. "Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of your duty. Without it, you dishonor the very oath you swore." The officers lowered their heads further, their silence a confession louder than words. The woman's husband turned to her then, his expression softening. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. She nodded, her lips trembling with gratitude. "I am now," she whispered. For the first time since the flashing lights had appeared in her mirror, she felt safe again. Her husband guided her back toward the car, his hand firm and reassuring. The officers stepped aside, no longer obstacles, no longer powerful just shadows in the glow of the patrol car's lights. The woman sat back inside her car, her hands still shaky, but her heart steadying. She watched through the window as her husband gave the officers one last look, the kind that carried a warning without needing words. Then he returned to her side. The night seemed quieter now, the tension slowly dissolving. The two officers walked back toward their car, their steps slower, heavier, weighed down by the lesson they had just received. They didn't speak. They didn't argue. They only carried their shame back with them. The woman started her engine, the hum filling the silence. Her husband slid into the passenger seat, his presence filling the space with calm. She glanced at him, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. "You came," she whispered. "I'll always come," he said simply. Her eyes softened. In that moment, she realized something powerful. She had always respected her husband's work, but tonight she understood the true meaning of his badge. It wasn't about rank or pride. It was about responsibility, about protecting not just her, but anyone who needed it. As she pulled back onto the road, leaving the flashing lights behind them, the lesson of the night stayed with her. The fear she had felt, the humiliation, the pressure, all of it was real. But so was the truth she had witnessed, that authority without respect crumbles, while calm dignity always wins. The two officers would never forget the night. They froze in front of the very values they had sworn to uphold. And the woman would never forget the night her husband showed her hand, everyone watching, that true power comes not from the uniform, but from the character behind it. The stars above sparkled in the dark sky as the car rolled forward. The woman exhaled deeply, releasing the last of her fear. She held the wheel firmly, her husband beside her, and whispered a quiet promise to herself. Never again would she doubt the strength of truth. And the story's lesson was clear. Carved into the night, power is temporary, but respect is eternal. Authority can be borrowed, but dignity must be earned.